Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Tori and this is my best friend Holland.
Hello.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break everything down as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Be sure to tread lightly, there will be hot takes and spoilers. Cut to the intro. All right, today I chose the Broadway show 6 for us to review. It was blind-ish to me. I had heard like 2 songs, and it was pretty familiar to you, right?
No.
Or more familiar?
I would say blind to both of us since we hadn't seen the show.
Okay, so we hadn't seen the show. So we saw the show when the Broadway tour came to town. And so we thought this would be a good thing to talk about. So if this is new to you, here's some spoiler-free background before we get into the scores. So I copied this from Wikipedia. 6 is
extensive research on this podcast.
We like to dig deep.
We dig real deep.
6 is a British musical comedy with music, books, and lyrics by Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss. It's a modern retelling of the lives of the 6 wives of Henry VIII, presented in the form of a pop concert. In the show, each of the wives, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anna of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, take turns telling their story to determine who suffered the most from their common husband. So the musical was premiered at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2017, where it was performed by students from Cambridge. And then 6 premiered in the West End at the Arts Theatre in January 2019 and has since embarked on a UK tour. It premiered in North America in May 2019 and on Broadway in February 2020, shortly thereafter following a hiatus due to the COVID pandemic. It officially opened at the Brooks Atkinson Theatre on October 3rd, 2021, and has since launched touring companies. So, I'm trying to decide if I want to talk about this now or if I might actually wait and dip into it when we talk about the characters.
Go ahead and do it now because I'm going to go first. So.
Okay, so in developing the characters, Marlowe and Moss were inspired by several real-life pop stars who were used as a composite and musical inspiration for the characters. So the 6 wives and their corresponding pop star inspirations are: Catherine of Aragon is modeled after a mixture of Beyonce, Jennifer Lopez, and Jennifer Hudson. Anne Boleyn includes elements of Miley Cyrus, Avril Lavigne, and Lily Allen. Jane Seymour is reminiscent of Adele, Sia, and Celine Dion. Anna of Cleves includes elements of Nicki Minaj and Rihanna. Catherine Howard is a blend of young pop stars and includes elements of Britney Spears and Ariana Grande. And Catherine Parr is inspired by Alicia Keys and Emily Sandé. So the original cast for the 2020/2021 Broadway was Catherine of Aragon was played by Adriana Hicks, Anne Boleyn, Andrea Macasayet. I'm sorry if I pronounce anything incorrectly. Jane Seymour by Abby Mueller, Anna of Cleves by Brittany Mack, Catherine Howard by Samantha Pauly, and Catherine Parr by Anna Uzelli. And it did win some awards. It was nominated for quite a few, like 18 or 20. It won 7. So at the Drama Desk Awards in 2022, it won the Ensemble Award, Outstanding Costume Design of a Musical, Outstanding Music, and Outstanding Lyrics. And then at the Outer Critics Circle Award in 2022, it won Outstanding New Broadway Musical, Outstanding Score, and Outstanding Costume Design. So that is the background. Holland, do you want to jump into our first category?
Sure. Our first category for theater shows is plot and story delivery, and musicals include the song numbers, but I do want to kind of give a bit of a caveat, at least for me. Tori and I haven't set in stone where we categorize certain things with musicals, but typically with plot and story delivery, I focus on the lyrics, the content of the musical numbers, the characters, that can be revealed in the musical numbers, but I don't necessarily consider that aspect. When it comes to complexity of songs or vocal ability or the composition of the song itself, I am, especially for this musical, I'm going to talk about that aspect in aesthetics because I think it fits that category best versus the characters or the plot. So I want to start my review by saying we typically, since the purpose of a musical number is to move the plot forward and give you insight into characters, our scoring sheets kind of put that into the plot and story delivery because it's delivering that story to you. But for me, in my review, I'm mostly focusing on the lyrics of the song in this category, and then because the vocal ability is pretty incredible in this show, I put that in aesthetics. Another thing I want to say before we get into this, because Tori and I would like to make sure that our listeners know, this show, although we are a kid-friendly show, we don't always review kid-friendly shows. So if you are thinking about seeing the musical Six and taking a young one with you, we would not necessarily endorse this as a child-friendly show. The lyrics of the songs are probably the most adult content. There's not a lot of adult visuals that you would see, but the lyrics of the song. So just kind of as a tip to parents out there, if you're wanting to go see the show and you want to take a little one for the first time, I'd highly, highly recommend you at least listen to the songs before you decide if it's appropriate for your child. So we usually like to make a little disclaimer if we're going to review content that may not be as appropriate for younger audiences.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to make that disclaimer, since I would say the majority of what we cover on this podcast is stuff that was created and directed for children and young audiences. This is not one of those.
Exactly. So for this category, plot and story delivery, we have a total possible score of 2, and I gave this 1 out of 2 points. So overall, the overarching delivery of this story, how you're meeting these former 6 wives of Henry VIII. They are the main cast of characters. They come on stage and they kind of announce to the audience. It kind of breaks this fourth wall a little bit, which is nice. It's structured as kind of a rock concert. And now you've come to the concert to hear the 6 wives of Henry VIII, former 6 wives of Henry VIII. And they are presenting to you that you're coming to listen to them give a concert, and they're having a sort of friendly, maybe not so friendly competition amongst themselves as to who was the more
deserving wife.
Yeah, or who was wronged the most by Henry VIII and who had it worse among them, who was the better wife, who kind of would win the crowned, top dog kind of thing. So it's kind of this competition style, and then they all sing a song. They all individually sing a song, and the other members kind of sing the backup vocals, kind of telling you a little bit of their historical story, which is based in the true history. It is a new interpretation or interpolation of history. But I think that's a really neat concept. And I think that I really liked when you open the playbill, it gives you like a picture or a portrait of the real woman that was one of the wives and gives you a little bio about them. And I think that's a great way to kind of pull your audience into this story and get you into buying in that these are real historical characters, with the suspension of disbelief that you're watching all of them when none of them necessarily, certainly none of them are alive, but none of them were necessarily alive and interacting with each other in this kind of setting. So this kind of modern retelling of historical characters is not necessarily new to media in general and is not new to theater, but I do like the presentation that's kind of given to you when you get in the door. It immediately sets this tone for a really fun show. And so I really enjoyed that. The lyrics of the songs are extremely clever. There's great rhyming schemes in there. Each queen that tells their story, in aesthetics, I'll kind of mention this, and like Tori already mentioned, the style of their song is very different, but even lyrically, the way that the songs are written are very different. They all still feel like it fits the musical, so it's not this jarring change in tone while you're watching it, but it does kind of fit the lyrics and the way that the songs are written kind of fit those characters very well. And then in between the songs, there's some pretty clever and humorous dialogue where the characters on stage kind of talk back and forth to each other. There's a few interactions during songs and between songs where members of the audience are kind of talked to like you're at a real concert, and the performer on stage is interacting like you're in a show. So overall, it's a really clever plot and a really clever premise. But a couple reasons that I couldn't give this full points is because although I would admit that the lyrics are very clever, I do think the overall concept is a little bit juvenile. I think that introducing these characters to us as this kind of high school cliquey, I'm better than you because when I dated our ex-boyfriend, I was the better girlfriend, all just feels very almost high school, and it almost feels like it was written for a very young audience, like even middle school or even younger. It kind of reminds me of a plot of kind of things that you would make up when you would play with toys as a kid, is like, you know, who's better, who's not, let's have a competition. And then they immediately, you know, they go through this whole thing, they all talk about who was dealt the worst hand, and then at the end they get into this kind of catty little fight amongst each other, and the whole premise of their discourse amongst each other is my trauma was worse than your trauma. And I just think that that's really, especially in this day and age, is really overused. I think it's kind of a cheap shot of a plot, is that the whole plot is whose trauma was worse than who else's trauma, instead of like just like being a little more mature about the right. story and the history. And then I really thought it was extremely like a very novice level resolution of the plot is the very last queen, was it Catherine Parr?
Yes.
Comes out and says, guys, we shouldn't fight, we should all be friends. And it's so elementary school type plot. And although it does work, I mean, when you're watching it, the way that the whole show is presented to you, like, it works. They make it work. It's a fun show. It's really fun to watch. But overall, that being the main thread of the plot is we're going to have kind of a whose trauma was worse competition. And then we all decide, oh, you know what? Our ex-boyfriend was the real, you know, he got the real worst end of the stick because he was such a bad person. We should all be friends. Like, it's just so juvenile to me. And so in thinking, because we kind of have to think through this a little critically, regardless of how much you enjoyed the show, I think that you can objectively say that it's a very, like, low-hanging fruit plot line there. So for that reason, I couldn't give it full points. So my 1 point out of 2, really that credit in my scoring is going to the lyrical composition and just how well the songs are written versus the overall plot of the show, which I think is unfortunate, because if the best substance of the plot is the album itself and not the show itself, then you can benefit from the story most by just listening to the songs versus going and seeing the show. So I feel bad because I know that 6 has a pretty big fan base, and I'm going to kind of knock down quite a few pegs in my review. But I do want to say I did enjoy the show and it was a fun thing to watch. But yeah, so 1 out of 2 for me.
Okay. So for me, for 2 points out of 2 points for plot and story delivery, I also gave it 1 out of 2 points. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that the whole suspension of disbelief that they present to you in the beginning, which is that we are the 6 ex-wives and we each had something terrible happen to us and we really want to talk about our stories, and we're going to make it fun by having which of course it's all fake, but like the illusion that the audience is going to pick the queenliest queen of us all or whatever, you know. So that's presented to you like, okay, this could be fun. Like there's a little bit of like, it almost kind of feels like jestery in a way. Like, so you're like, okay, this is going to be funny. And then to have all of that go to the end of the show, and then for Catherine Parr to basically be like, but let's not compare to one another because that's unhealthy to do and we shouldn't compare ourselves, which is true. But then I feel like it basically kills, in a way, it kind of kills the fun of the goofiness of it. And it makes you realize you guys aren't existing in the same time-space continuum anyway because of how history did. So if we're going to suspend the disbelief, that you guys couldn't even be the six of you in the same room together, then why are we going to now suddenly make this more realistic with the moral of let's not compare and we should all be friends? Like, it's so, you have to suspend the disbelief in order for the show to work. And it does work. I think it works more than it doesn't work. But I think that weird thing at the end, while I don't disagree with the message that, like, you shouldn't compare your trauma, you know, I think that it makes the end of the show feel a little weird and disjointed, because for the entire show, which the show is not very long, it's like less than 90 minutes, which it's the shortest Broadway production I've ever seen. But for this a little over an hour, you've taken all of this time to put aside the fact that this couldn't actually happen. This is here, we're here for fun. And now it suddenly doesn't really feel like we're here for fun anymore. So I don't know, just something about that felt odd. Like it just didn't go. It didn't flow into like a natural sort of ending. It kind of felt like, it's not even like it was like a plot twist and then resolution. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess at the end of it, there really isn't anywhere else we could go unless the audience really did get to choose each night who the queenliest queen was.
I feel like that would have been a better ending.
That's what I expected to happen. So, like I said, I went in kind of blind. I had heard like the main song that everybody knows, which is like the final song, 6, you know. I'd heard that song. I liked that song. When I went in and they presented this idea, I thought, oh, cool. Is there like actual audience interaction? Because there are parts in the show, since it is presented more like a rock concert, or concert, because not all the songs are necessarily rock based, but it's presented as a concert. And there were moments where like the characters were interacting with the audience. So I thought, okay, cool. Like, are we actually given some power in maybe the ending of the story? Do we get to cheer at the end, and whoever has the loudest cheer, then they get like, the ending could be different every night? Like, that's what I expected, and almost what I thought could have been more fun. I don't know. But let me talk about some of the things I really did like. I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of that, since that was your last point. The show really does start off with a lot of high energy, like a real bang from the beginning, momentum. I was sitting there speechless after the first song, because not only is it super impressive musically and vocally, which I'll get into when we go into aesthetics, but just straight out of the gate, attention grabbing. There was no build up. There was no like really long explanation of context. It was just boom, here we are. We're going to have fun. Like, and automatically showed off like kind of this high, like this sort of energy high. And I really liked that. The pace is obviously pretty fast because overall it's a short show, and I'm really okay with that. There are really only 9 songs, 2 reprises, and then like the encore. So 9 main songs. You get 3 group songs and then 6 individual songs, because each of the wives has an individual song. That's really not that long. Sure, the song numbers are kind of long. You know, some are 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes. But if you think about that, like, that's really not any longer than like a normal album would be for like another artist. So like a Taylor Swift album is probably just as long, or maybe longer, than the 6 album.
Yeah, if you get a deluxe version or something.
So if you think about it, like, you're getting an entire character's story or piece of it for the show. You're getting all of that in like 8 minutes, okay? And then you're moving on to the next character. It's really fast, and if you're not paying attention, you will miss stuff. So I think it benefits the pace that a lot of the songs are very high energy. Sorry, I keep hitting the thing. A lot of the songs are very high energy and very entertaining, and I think it has to be to keep your audience focused enough on what's going on so that you don't miss anything, because it's going to move on whether you're paying attention or not. There is the midway point of the show, okay, so between wives 3 and 4, they go to the House of Holbein, and all of a sudden everything is broken, with this weird midway point being this silly Europop rave with neon colors and
glow in the dark
sunglasses. And you would think that doesn't work, but it does.
It's got some Euro pop music in there.
Literally in the middle of the show. And I think it helps because it brings you out of the song of Jane Seymour's, which was like the saddest song because she was like the wife that, you know, is written to be like the only wife that he actually ever really loved. And then she gives him a son and dies in childbirth and like all these things, or shortly after childbirth. And it's just like really heart-wrenching, the song. And then it's like, we're at the House of Holbein. And so I think it is very silly, the juxtaposition, but it's not so close together that it feels like you've shoved aside the previous song, but it kind of tells the audience it's okay for you to laugh and smile again. Like, we're going to be silly now for 5 minutes. Like, it's okay. You can take a deep breath. And then we move on to Anna of Cleves. And so I think it's kind of necessary because I think if you had moved straight from Jane Seymour's song into Anna of Cleves' song, everybody would have been like, there just would not have been any like energetic response, I think, to Anna of Cleves' song. So I think it's structured in a way like story-wise and kind of mood-wise. The cohesion follows such a pattern where it kind of mixes levity into the hardships and depth and like death. I mean, the show talks about death like it's nothing. So they have to figure out a way to balance that without snuffing it, like the hardships. And they created a very palatable balance, I think, between the fact that like we're talking about beheadings and, you know, terribly awful, heartbreaking things. So we have to mix in something kind of light in order for people to want to sit here for up to 90 minutes and listen to this. And I think they achieve that goal. I honestly think, though, that things get a little boring around Catherine Parr's song. She's the final wife. She's the one that survived Henry VIII. And her story is basically that she loved another man, but had to marry Henry VIII because that's just how things happened back then. And her song is that I don't need your love. So, and the song's good. I'm not saying that the song is in any way like bad musically, but for some reason, at least to me, maybe I'm the only one, I feel like it was the easiest place in the show for me to get a little zoned out. I started losing focus right about then. And I don't think it's anything against the song or the actress that I saw or anything like that. I just think that for some reason, since I know we're ramping into the finale, it feels a little too, what's the word I'm looking for?
It does feel like it really slows your momentum.
Yeah, like the momentum just slows.
And I found that song kind of confusing because she writes the whole refrain she's saying is, I don't need your love, but it's like, that would seem more appropriate to be directed to Henry VIII because she doesn't love him. But she says at the beginning of the song that this is a letter she wrote to the man she actually did love. And so for me, I kind of felt myself through the majority of that song being like really confused.
I was confused too because I assumed that she was singing to Henry VIII, and then there is some phrase in there, I cannot recall all of the lyrics, but there is some phrase in here where I'm like, wait a second, who is she singing to?
Yeah.
So there is like a level, and maybe it's because I did zone out, but I did zone out at one point during her song, and I'm sorry, Catherine Parr. But really, I just think that things get really boring. I'm glad that they do pick up for the finale, though, because I think the finale is really the most iconic song and really drives it home. But I don't like that we have to slog through Catherine Parr's song and then the whole let's be friends and we shouldn't compare trauma, even though we've made this whole show about a competition. So now we're going to retcon that in order to resolve the show. Okay, we're going to sing a song together. Okay, bye, audience. Have a good day. And that's literally how it ends. So I think it's good. I think it's incredibly entertaining. Like I said, high energy. I like how they've balanced the sad with the happy, or sad with the silly, I should say. And I think they bounce back and forth quite a bit really well. But it's just really not perfect. And I think it could have been maybe framed a different way. I don't really know what the solution is. I just know that if I'm looking for something that is story driven, this is not the show I'm going to rely on to do that. So 1 out of 2 for me.
Alrighty. So our next category is characters, which is a total possible score of 3. I gave this 1 out of 3 points for characters. I do have to start by saying the design of these characters and the casting and the vocal ability, I can't give more praise to. It's all done very, very well. So this is not directed to any one individual's portrayal, which, you know, it hardly ever is in our show. Although we have seen some shows where we felt like there was some poor casting going on there, but not in this show. It was all done very, very well. And from what I've seen of clips of like the original Broadway cast, it was all in line with what you would expect going to a show or going to this show, whether you're seeing it, you know, on Broadway or on tour or in the UK if they're still showing there. I'm not sure, but my biggest problem with these characters is it kind of weaves into the plot as well, but these characters they have such little to almost no growth and development. They're all extremely flat. They're generally likable. I mean, they're fun, they're having a good time, like they're really engaging, and they have, you know, really humorous moments where we get to watch them interact with each other, and it's entertaining, but we really know nothing about them until they come and sing their song, and then the only thing we're told about them, their whole defining characteristic and defining character, is their trauma related to their marriage to Henry VIII. And I don't think that's a bad place to start. I think that's actually a very good place to start, because everybody that's coming to see this show has probably heard of Henry VIII, and it's a very sensationalized story and period of history anyways, maybe over sensationalized, but everybody has a general idea that divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Like, these are the wives of Henry VIII. Like, you know, they had pretty bad luck. Henry VIII was a piece of work, you know? So it's a good place to start, because that's kind of why your audience has felt compelled to go see the show, is because they want to hear about these wives and what was their experience being married to Henry VIII. Oh, they're all here together and they're going to tell us. Great. That's fine. That's it. That's the only place it goes for the whole show, is here's what life was like being married to Henry VIII. I'm going to tell you in a 4-minute song, or however long the songs are. And then we're going to all have a brief moments where we argue that my trauma was better than your trauma, or worse, you know, worse meaning I get more points and I'm going to win the competition. And then we're all going to have an oops, I've changed moment, and now we're best friends. And I think that that's pretty terrible character development, is that you give these women very flat attributes and character traits, and then they all are just like best friends, we're all going to get along, which I know I mentioned in the plot as well, but it also kind of comes into play with the characters also. It just makes it hard to root for a protagonist, because you can't really, the only way you can buy into any of these women, any of these queens, the only way that you can buy into them is by listening to their really sad stories about life. So it gives you empathy, but then it still is just really, really flat. And I think the highlight of learning about these characters is the way it's presented, with the different musical styles and the really cool costumes and, you know, stuff like that, so that you don't even really care to learn more about them, because it's more about the presentation than it is the substance.
Right.
And so, although I do think I have to give credit to, you know, the casting, the character design, they're all designed very uniquely. They're all cast very uniquely. Every woman on stage is, you know, very unique, and it's very diverse, and, you know, it's great and it's very creative. but there's just not a lot of substance underneath. And so that's the biggest reason I gave it 1 out of 3. Also, some of the like things you find out about these characters are very mature content, and it's almost a little jarring in some spots when they're kind of telling you their trauma, and you're like, oh, I came in for a really fun time, and then somebody unveils a fact about themselves, which you can read the history and find out what that is, but unveils this very horrific thing that happened to them, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I almost need to like take a minute because you presented that to me in like a really pretty package, but oh my gosh, that's a horrible thing. Like and we don't even get to take a beat to kind of like recover from hearing about this traumatic thing. We're just moving on with the next song. And so I don't think that's necessarily like a critique to the aesthetics necessarily. I think it's more of a critique to the character because it doesn't give your audience time to breathe and take time to really get to know who these people are. And I also, in general, I think it's kind of problematic that here you had the opportunity to present these women who all of history, and I think they even maybe mentioned this in the song, is that you know, they've been lost in the story. These women were real women and they had real lives, and they've been lost to history because their only defining characteristic is that they were married to Henry VIII. And the only thing we really know about them by the end is they were married to Henry VIII, and wasn't that terrible. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this was a great opportunity to go into this show and find out these women were real women, and they had great qualities, and they did important things, and maybe we just don't know because we just don't know.
I think the only mention that they make is that Catherine Parr says in her song that she was the first woman published under her own name in the UK.
Right. And so that's the one thing that we learn about these women, and I feel like we had a really big opportunity to kind of flip the script and say, oh, you know what? We're not defined by the man that we married. We're defined by our own women. And I'm not trying to take, any kind of, make it, problematic by saying so, but I felt like that was where this show was going, was that, hey, we're unique individuals and we're not defined by who we married. We're defined by our own lives. Mm-hmm. And yet we didn't really get hardly any of that. And so I think that that's just, in general, it's kind of poor. It's just poor character development and, poor character design, internally, not necessarily like visually. So for that reason, I give it 1 out of 3 points.
Okay. For me, I gave characters 2 out of 3 points. I don't disagree with what you said, though. I just think that I focused a little bit more on what I thought was good. I like that, and most of that really has to do with the design of the characters and the musical stylings that each character is given.
So, and that's why I just wanted to say I credit that into aesthetics. Okay. So I agree that all of that is very positive, but the reason my score for characters was higher is because I attributed that into aesthetics.
Okay, so I kind of did too. Like the vocal ability and music itself, I attribute to aesthetics. But as far as the style, because I think it gives a different mood to each character, and it helps keep them distinct, as well as the color scheme that's assigned to each wife, which also helps keep them distinct. It does sort of go hand in hand linked with aesthetics, because when a character is the focus, a lot of the stage changes to match them color wise. But I think that those colors also sort of, maybe I'm reading into this too much, but in a way, it kind of felt like the colors were purposely chosen for each character in color psychology. So you know how certain colors are said to sort of invoke different moods, and I think that they did that purposefully with a lot of the characters. So Catherine of Aragon, she's all golds. So you think about it, Catherine of Aragon, she had the longest marriage. She was crowned queen the longest. So she was very used to the regal lifestyle. She was basically, they mentioned that she was basically grown up and taught to be that, so I think the gold is it makes a lot of sense to be attached to her. And I think all of those golds and yellows that are given to her in her song and in different mentions of her whenever she's the focus, it helped it sort of solidify in my mind, like who she was and why that gold was important. And then you have like, next was,
Anne
Boleyn. And she's green. And so like green is like a little bit more of like a lighter color. It feels more youthful. I think it kind of has like this intonation of like being more lighthearted. It kind of signifies things like growth or spring. Do I think that all of these things are evident in the character? No. But I do appreciate that there was like such a distinct line drawn between each of their designs. And so again, maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it and I shouldn't be thinking about the psychology behind colors. But for me, it really did help keep them in my brain, like organized. Because I knew like, okay, this girl is this color, this girl is this color. And I think knowing that and then like the musical style that is attached to that color and to that character, it really helped me at least to kind of keep them distinct. I do think though that it's unfortunate that the characters, while pretty, I would say diverse from each other, they almost feel like, what am I trying to say? Caricatures of what they're presented to be. And I think that this actually is maybe less of a character critique for me and more of a pacing critique. And I agree with what you said about there being not really any growth between the beginning and the end. And I think that's because of the whole competition style. Like if you watch a show like American Idol, you're not watching American Idol for the character growth. Because it's not the presentation of that show.
But even shows like American Idol, they find a way to give you characters to root for.
Sure, but that's because they've stretched the whole competition into 12 weeks of 2 hours each. And so we have 85 minutes and we're bouncing so fast from character to character, we don't have time to grow these characters. So I think what really could have benefited these characters and probably would have given, for me, the chance to have this be 3 out of 3 is, all right, let's add another act. Why does this have to be a 1-act play?
And there's no intermission.
Right. So give us an intermission, break it up. After Catherine Parr's solo song, you know what? You're right. We don't have to compare trauma. We don't have to make this a competition. Let's talk about what we would have done if we had survived or stayed in. What were our aspirations and goals as individual women? If we had never gotten into the castle, what would we have done? Like, give us those moments. Sure, it may all be made up. I don't give a flip. They're already made up being here on the stage together.
Right.
So if we're going to suspend that disbelief, give me the chance to really attach myself to these women by giving me more of who they are as people and what their motivations were outside of Henry VIII. So I agree with you on that. I think that each character is played the way it was written, and I just wish that the characters had been given more time individually. Characters like Boleyn and Cleves are less serious, and I think their songs very much reflect that. I think they're probably the two most lighthearted songs. Really, they kind of borderline on flippant if you listen to them. And then you have the more muted personalities of like Catherine of Aragon and Catherine Parr. And they kind of have a more, I guess, mature stance. And their songs reflect that. And then you have like the incredibly sad songs. And like you said, they almost bounce so quickly out of them. But like Jane Seymour and Catherine Howard, they have these songs and they start out happy and then they just like dissolve into these terribly heartbreaking stories. And I really don't want to spoil those stories because I think that they're worth looking into and reading for yourself or listening to the music themselves. But I do think that the like let's not compare bit that we kind of talk about in the plot, I think it feels kind of forced among the characters, and it was the first time in the show that I really didn't believe the actors. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I thought they were doing their job and they were doing it well, and I believed they were who they were representing. And then in this moment, it kind of felt weird. It's like, have you ever watched like a high school drama class do like improv on the fly? It kind of felt like that. And like it was like the one time that I really just felt like the acting wasn't up to par. And I don't know why that is, but overall, I do think that like that everything that was given was done really well. I just can't give it more than 2 points because there's so much that could have the potential. That 1 point is the potential that they had and did not fulfill. So 2 out of 3 points for me for characters.
Alrighty, so our next category is aesthetics. So out of a total possible score, I give this 1.5 points out of 2 for aesthetics. I think the overall, the setting and the set is just brilliant for this show. I think that it's absolutely fantastic. They make it like a stage concert, a rock or pop concert with lights in the background. The whole band or / orchestra, which is really a band, is on stage. I really like the fact, I think it's really, really cool that they actually call the band their ladies in waiting. They introduce them the way that a concert performer would, and then it's an all-female band. So I think it's a 4-piece band, is it?
Yes, I believe so.
So again, really small cast, really small band / orchestra, and they bring the house down with very limited number of people on stage. I like that the band stays on stage the whole time. There's only one set, which, can be you can consider it a pro or a con based on your preference, but it works. It fits really well. The lighting changes are great. They fit every queen's mood, mood or style. What you mentioned, I'm not going to rehash it, but I really, really appreciate what you mentioned, how each queen is colored distinctly, and it fits. I feel like it fits their personality, and it also fits their musical style. And then the lighting cues change based on, who's performing and what the style of that song is. The band instrumentally changes. It's very, very, it's just very, very fun. It's really fun, and it's really creative, and it's really engaging. Because it's also different, it also keeps you engaged in the show as a viewer or listener, because you aren't stuck with what I felt like I experienced in Hadestown. Go listen to that episode if you haven't. But what I kind of experienced, there were moments where I'm like, I feel like I've either listened to a really long song or the same song for too long. And that does not happen in the show at all. It's very dynamic and very engaging. And then I also like that this is a newer show. It's been on the stage for a less amount of time, and it did not follow what seems to be kind of trendy these days in being a sung-through musical. I like that the queens stop and take time and talk to each other. There is dialogue in between the songs that kind of round out who these people are and round out the purpose of the songs and kind of what they've experienced and how it relates to the quote-unquote competition that's going on. I think the vocal mixing is done really, really well. I feel like a lot of these songs, because the style's different, somebody singing lead for different songs, I never got to the point where I felt like I couldn't hear somebody that I was supposed to hear. And that's huge, because I feel like even in a concert venue or in a stage show, there's always that risk that the sound mixing isn't going to be quality. And it was impeccable in this show. One little thing that I thought was neat with the costumes is that all of the queens, they sing into a handheld microphone. That is their actual microphone. They don't wear the theater head mics, and that microphone is not a prop. It's actually the microphone that they're using. So again, it just kind of fills into this suspension of disbelief that we're watching a concert. The costumes all fit the characters really well in the same way that Tori kind of already talked about how they're all very unique and distinct. Their costumes also reflect that. They kind of feel like a pop star concert costume, and yet it still has these notes of like Tudor era, style, wardrobe choices. So it's just all done really, really well. Visually and aesthetically, it's just absolutely fantastic. And I think that's one reason that this show is as popular as it is. It's kind of following in the line of giving a modern setting or modern visuals for a historical tale, like Hamilton or Hadestown, which is not technically historical, it's a myth, but shows like that. And yet it's not saying we're going to take an era of history to tell the story. We're going to make this a modern day pop rock concert. I just think that's a very great setting, and it hits the mark on every time. The fact that they have confetti at the end, they have an encore song at the end, all of that is really in line with that. I have to talk about, and I know Tori's going to talk about this, but I also just have to highlight the vocal ability of this cast. It is so easy, I think, to have an all-female cast and all-female vocals, and it vocally sounds, I wouldn't say flat, but it's like it all fits in one register. That there's not a lot of depth or breadth to what you're hearing vocally, that everybody's just kind of singing, a 3-part harmony in this same register for the entire show. And I think they did a great job of writing songs and casting songs for very diverse vocal abilities. And that, again, keeps you engaged throughout the show. And so they did really, really well. A couple things, one kind of critique I have, and I don't know if this is a valid critique, but for me it was a big distraction during the show, is my first instrument has been the drums. So I was watching the drummer a lot during the show, especially because it's only a 4-piece band, and the drummer was pretty visible, and there were parts where I was not hearing what the drummer was playing, or rather the drummer was not playing what I was hearing. And so there were moments in the show where you're hearing a drum beat, or maybe it's a drum machine or something, and then the drummer is moving, like they're playing their instruments, but that's not what you're hearing at all.
I never noticed that.
There were several moments where there was a disconnect between what I was hearing rhythmically and percussion wise and beat wise, and it didn't match what I'm watching the drummer do. And it was for several songs, and I finally guessed, and I don't know if this is true or not. At first I thought they have a drum machine, or they have somebody backstage that's playing in an orchestra, and they have 2 drummers, which happens in bands. Like you have bands with a drummer and a percussionist, or even 2 drummers, or multiple rhythm section, and it works. It's done, in music all over. So I thought maybe they have somebody in the pit or backstage playing in addition to the drummer. Or I thought maybe they have a drum track playing and the drummer's just filling in over that drum track. And that was distracting for me, because I thought, are we not actually watching these musicians play? Are these singers singing over a pre-recorded track and the musicians are just there for show? Because if so, I'm feeling cheated in a show. But what I thought may be possible, and I have not confirmed it, and I don't even know if there's a way to confirm it, I thought maybe the drummer has a loop pedal. And so they're able to play something on an electronic pad, like a drum machine,
and then loop it,
and then loop that, and then play over top their own instruments. And maybe that's just me being dumb that I didn't think of that initially, and that's why it was so distracting for me. But that was something that I felt like was an unanswered question for me. And again,
it would make sense, because I do feel like a lot of the musical numbers feel very full. And one of my questions was, how does it sound that full when there's only 4 people up there? So maybe that would answer the question, is that there is like a loop pedal or something like that. Yeah. Or they play along with other pre-recorded
tracks. Yeah. So for that reason, and I don't think, and that may be something that somebody who is a bass player, a keyboard player, an electric guitar player, maybe individuals that are a lot more well-versed in those instruments may catch similar things in those musicians as well. So because of that, I thought a loop pedal might be kind of tough to do, mostly because I never caught a moment where I heard the beginning of the first part and then heard that continue. So for that reason, I thought, are they playing over a recorded track? Because I kind of feel, because it sounds really, really full. It sounds way more than a 4-piece band. I thought maybe that was the case, which if that's how they do the show, then that's fine. They made that decision. But visually, it was distracting because what I was seeing wasn't matching what I was hearing. So I had a bit of a critique for that, but I didn't necessarily deduct points for it. That was just something I noticed. The reason I did not give this full points, and again, this is not a slight to any of the performers in this show, but the song where they're all singing the House of Holbein or whatever, they all are singing in German accents. And it is almost impossible to understand what anyone is saying because they're singing on top of each other in these German accents, which is great. It fits. I mean, it fits the story, but it is so difficult to understand what they're saying because the words are coming so quickly. And I don't think that's necessarily like, some people might say, well, you should just get better at listening. But I think you have an English speaking audience with either a American accent, or when this show was in the UK, a British accent. Hearing English in a German accent is not natural for someone to follow,
right?
Especially when the lyrics are coming out so quickly. And so I think that could have been corrected by either changing that song somehow to make it a little more easy to understand. I remember for that whole song, I was like, I like this song, but I couldn't tell you what they're saying at all. They're saying something about painting somebody's picture, but I have no idea. And I feel like that's a bit of a disservice because, like you said, I think that I would agree. I think that was a great point that song is a great middle point to kind of transition you into more of back into that more lighthearted feel. So for me to not really know what anybody's saying is kind of disappointing. So because of that reason, and because the show is so short and there are only so many songs, I felt like it was reason enough to deduct half a point for that. So 1.5 out of 2 for aesthetics for me.
Okay, for me, for aesthetics, I also gave it 1.5 points out of 2. I think I'm not going to beat into the ground any of the points that you already made. I'm just going to touch them very lightly. So absolutely crazy vocals. 6-part harmony stacking is not easy. Not easy. And they do it multiple times in this show and with really interesting and unusual chords too. And it was so satisfying. At one point, the hairs on my arms stood up because I was like just soaking it in. It was so good. Yes, the shout out, by the way, to the bass player in the band, because all I kept thinking through the whole show was, man, that bass is so good. That bass is so good. And like, I know I have said in other music centric episodes on the podcast that like the bass is one of the instruments that I can hear really well when I listen to music. And like, I love a really good bass line, and the bass was just going everywhere in like
fantastic.
The most satisfying way. I think the band players on stage add to the feeling of fullness, kind of like what you said. My question was going to be, how does it sound so full? It's a little confusing, but maybe that your theory kind of helps that question of mine. But I'd also think it adds to the feeling of fullness physically on the stage, because if you think about it, you have this whole stage and only 6 actors. So if you don't have additional people on the stage, I think it could feel very empty. So I think that adding the instruments and the 4-person band kind of helps fill the space in a way that makes sense and is not super distracting, and just sort of like fits the appearance that this show is a concert and not a theater production. Lots of lighting effects, which I think are nice and fit the colors of the characters and transition very well. But everything else really on the stage, there's no screens. There's no, other than like, I think they might use fog once and then confetti like twice. But other than those things, everything else on the stage is simply actor movement. And I think they do, I wouldn't say it's like, well, it is choreography. It's not like the most complicated, most dancey theater choreography I've ever seen, but it's choreography. And I think the movements and the transitions between characters is really, really satisfying. A lot of the formations are really nice and I think add visually to the appeal. Again, transitions are just super smooth, but I couldn't give it full points. And I hope that this is not me being too nitpicky, but as far as aesthetically, while everything was done well, I don't think anything that they did felt new or like visually. There was nothing that wowed me visually or made me think, wow, I've never seen that before, or wow, that was super clever. It was just basics done really well, and that was about it. And so sure, maybe I'm being nitpicky as far as aesthetics go, but I think because the show is so short, and you really don't get the time to focus on the story and characters, as we have already touched on, I wish that they had given us a little bit more of a wow factor somehow, in some way. I don't ask me what I wanted to see. I just think that looking back, it just felt basic and not Broadway. And I'm sorry if that sounds harsh. I only took half a point off for it. But I've seen quite a few of the Broadway tour shows now, and I feel like if there is nothing specific about your stage at any point in the show that sticks in my brain as memorable, then I think that's kind of a problem. And while what sticks in my head is the vocals and the music, so I'm not discrediting that, but as far as all of the visual and practical effects, and set itself, there was nothing that necessarily impressed me in those regards. Didn't disappoint me, but didn't impress me either. So all of that being said, 1.5 points out of 2 for me.
Alrighty, so our next category, as always, second to last category, is personal taste and preference. Only allowed 2 points, and I gave this 0.5 point out of 2, which sounds really harsh, but it's not because I didn't enjoy this show. I really did have a good time when I was there. When we saw the show, it was a fun experience. It was a good time. I thought it was done very well. I find probably about 1 or 2 of the songs enjoyable to listen to on their own, just because it's, fun to listen to. But the reason I couldn't really give this more than 0.5 point is because I feel like this show was more of an experience, and now that I've done it, I don't see the value in indulging in it further. And it's like one and done. I can check that off my list. I saw the show. It was fun. It was a fun time, but it was really only okay. There's not much for it to offer to keep me coming back for more, to see it again, or to keep me listening to the songs over and over again. And I think part of that is just because of some of the negative points that I talked about in the characters and the plot. It's a pretty juvenile, overarching plot where we're enemies and then, oops, let's just be friends instead. I just think that's very juvenile. And then lyrically, the songs, they get into some really heavy stuff. And so some of those songs, it's like, even though the song might be fun to listen to, the content of it is something I'm like, because lyrics to me are more impactful in songs than music, and Tori and I've had this discussion before, but lyrics are the first thing that I really listen to in songs. Because of that, I can only re-listen to the songs here and there, because some of them are just either musically, I don't think they're super interesting. Like I Don't Need Your Love, I think that song's a little boring. Or some of the other songs that might be really fun to listen to, once I personally start hearing the lyrics, I'm like, oh, this got really heavy real fast. But it's such a bop, but it's just such a sad bop.
That's how I feel about Catherine Howard's song.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang.
Yeah. So for that reason, I only gave it half a point out of 2. And it wasn't because I disliked it when I was experiencing it, but because I just don't really see the need to experience it more than once.
So for me, for personal taste and preference, out of 2 points, I gave it 1 point. How I gauge personal taste and preference is how much do I desire to participate in this outside of preparing for this podcast. How much time do I want to devote? How excited am I? And I'm not going to say that I was in any way disappointed to prep this episode. I don't want to make it sound like that. However, kind of like you, I saw the show and I liked it and I liked the songs, but I'm not playing them a lot. This is the one category I can compare. So let me compare. On the flip side, when we did our Hadestown episode, I listened to that soundtrack every day for almost a month after I saw that show. Almost a month. I listened to that every day because I just couldn't get enough. I just loved it so much. I wanted to hear it more. I've listened to 6 one time since we saw it, and it was to help me with my notes for this podcast. And I'm not it wasn't begrudgingly or anything like that. I just haven't felt I haven't felt myself drawn to continuously listen to it. It's just not in my rotation. It's not something that, I'm like, oh, this musical was so great and I really enjoyed it and I'm going to put it in my musicals playlist. There are some songs that I've thrown in there, but it's just not something I'm seeking out. I loved the concept. I loved the style. I loved the music, but I didn't love it enough to sort of adopt it into my regular listening. So because of that, I only gave it half credit, which is 1 point out of 2.
Alrighty, so last category is creativity, and I went back and forth on this category for a little while because I was thinking the other day in preparation for recording this episode, and I had a thought that's probably going to get me canceled by all the 6 fans that are out there, because I know this show has a huge following. There are people that have seen this show multiple times just because they enjoy it so much.
When we saw it, we saw people coming to the show dressed up as one of the queens. And I was like, what is happening right now?
I mean, there are huge fans of the show. And so this is probably going to get me canceled by all of them. And the question I kind of had to ask myself was, this show, does it feel more like a theme park production than a Broadway show? Or a cruise line production than a Broadway show? And I think I would have to say yes. This feels like the kind of show, it's really short, it's 90 minutes. You go into, not Disney World because their shows are way shorter, but you're on a cruise and you walk into the theater and this is what they put on for you and you have a nice time and then you go back to the pool or something. Yeah. Or you're at the theme park and you go in because you want to take a break because it's hot out and you don't want to ride any roller coasters, and you go in and you watch this show and yay, all the queens are friends at the end. Woo, I feel great. I'm gonna go ride a roller coaster and throw up now. I mean, which to me, I feel like that's really what this show is, more than your expected Broadway show.
Yeah.
And the reason that I wanted to mention this in creativity is I think that, yes, that is true about this show, but it's so impressive that a show of that quote unquote caliber has been so successful and has had such a following and has actually done very well on Broadway,
But
merits points for creativity.
What I forgot to mention too in the like very beginning is that not only was it obviously in the UK and on Broadway, but there has been a Canadian production, a South Korean production, a Hungarian production, and a Polish production of this show, which is crazy.
Yeah. So because of that, because I think it's I think some snobs would say it's a lesser caliber show. I don't think that's the case. I just think it's not the same kind of show that you would see on Broadway. And so for it to be as successful as it is, it absolutely should get full points for creativity. I just think that is just respecting the fact that something like this has done so well. And because it has a pretty big following as well. One critique I did have, and I didn't know where else to kind of mention this, and maybe I just forgot to write it down or forgot to mention it earlier, but one thing I do think is a risk with this show is there are a lot of very modern references in the lyrics and, visually. And I think that it has the risk of being dated after a couple of years. For example, one of Anne Boleyn's songs, her opening scene with her when she's about to start her specific song, she's sitting on the phone or sitting on the stage with a cell phone, taking a selfie or something like that. And then one of the lyrics in her songs is LOL, say oh well. And I think that already people are moving away from saying LOL in texting or just, verbally, culturally that is going out of style. And so I think there's a risk of the show feeling very dated into current times. So whether or not it stays a long-standing show or whether or not it continues to change with the time, I think will be interesting to see. But full points for creativity for me. 1 out of 1.
Okay, so for creativity for me, I gave this 0.5 point out of 1. I think that it has certainly become iconic, and I do not want to diminish that at all. However, and I had this thought while watching the show, and I think I actually mentioned it to you while we were driving back after the show. It sort of feels like I wonder if Six would be as popular as it is if it had not come in the wake of Hamilton, which was another show, insanely popular, we've covered it, that focuses on historical characters or periods and presents that in a more modern way. It's obviously packaged differently, but I wonder, it kind of feels maybe inspired or on the coattails of Hamilton's success. And I guess I can never really know the answer to that question, which is, would it have been as successful? I don't know. But I think, unfortunately, because of the timing of it, to me, as the consumer, it felt a little bit like, all right, this is the popular trend. Let's try it with Henry VIII's wives. And so it almost capitalized on the wave that I think is probably still kind of flowing for Hamilton. And it makes it feel a little less new from my perspective. So I don't have much to say outside of that. I think that I'm happy for the success it's having. And I agree with your thing about it potentially being dated. There's that whole scene in the House of Holbein about the girls, they go up there and they get like their profile picture taken and then it's swiped left or right, which is an obvious Tinder reference. How long is Tinder going to be a thing for that to be a relevant analogy or example to use? So I think it does have the potential to be really dated, which I think is a weird thing to say when you're talking about real historical characters. To say the show about these real historical characters may end up dated is such a strange phrase to even mention, but I think it's because it has been packaged in such a way that is very trendy. Like, the point of this whole show is trendy, and it even styles each character's songs based on successful women musical artists, and those trends are going to change too. Not to say that those in any way diminishes like the success of those people. They will always be successful in their era and time. But in 15 years or even more, are any of those names going to have the same impact? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, there are some artists like Michael Jackson that have been impacting us for 50 years. So who am I to say? But I think that there's just so much risk, I think, in the way that this show is packaged, that I couldn't in good conscience give it a full point. So your final score ended up being?
My final score for 6 is a 5.
My final score for 6 is 6. Hey! I didn't do that on purpose. All right. Do you have any other thoughts before we jump into lightning round?
I don't.
Okay. Story based. Who's your favorite character?
That's kind of a hard question. Story based?
Okay, let me rephrase the question. If you had to pick the queenliest queen of them all as the presented question to us in the beginning, who would you pick as your favorite queen?
Just my favorite queen?
Sure.
Probably would be Anna of Cleves.
Okay.
Yeah. I just think she's like, I just think it's really funny that she got like jilted by Henry VIII and she's like, well, guess I'll just chill in my castle.
Yeah.
Like, I just think it's really funny.
I think I'd pick Catherine of Aragon just because I'm like, that lady put up with him for so many years and then he was like, nah, I don't want to be married to you anymore. Yeah. So like, I just feel like she deserved it the most.
True. And he's like, actually, you're Catholic. I'm going to say I'm in charge of the church now so that I can divorce you.
Yeah.
Like, way to like get her, stab her in the heart.
I know,
there.
Right? Okay, so favorite queen in regards to vocal or their song?
I thought that Anne Boleyn's song was really impressive.
Don't Lose Your Head?
Yeah. There's a part in the song where she, like, maybe it's like a run or something, but she, like towards the last chorus, she, like, hits that, like, those notes that are just really, like, satisfying. And so I thought she did a really good job. I can't really think of any other moments where I thought the vocals of them together, like their 6-part harmony and stuff, was really, really good. But I can't think of any song specifically where I was like, oh my gosh, the vocals were insane. But I feel like I did have that reaction during the show, but I couldn't tell you who specifically it was. So I guess I would just have to say that. Okay.
For me, I would pick Heart of Stone, which was Jane Seymour's song. It's so sad. But her vocal ability had my mouth hanging open. I was so impressed.
I was so mad during that song because somebody 2 rows behind us decided to sing along for the whole thing.
Yeah, that did kind of
also,
ruin it.
if you've made it this far and listening and you're a Six fan, please don't sing along. We're trying to watch the show.
Sing along in your car.
Sing along in your car on the drive home. Don't sing along in the
ear.
Theater behind me.
Yeah.
You could sing behind other people. No, I'm just kidding. But don't sing along. And so I felt like
it's just poor etiquette.
Yeah. I felt like for that whole song, I was like so distracted by that other person that decided to sing. That individual sang other songs too. But that was the one I specifically remembered.
Yeah.
Having to listen to a sing along during it.
Okay, so least favorite character or song?
Probably the I Don't Need Your Love.
Same. Sorry,
Catherine Parr. Yeah, probably Catherine Parr. Yeah, I didn't like her song at all, really. It was kind of boring.
I already talked about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That was your answer too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, did you have any favorite visual moment?
I was actually really surprised by the confetti at the end. I was like, they should have had confetti. And then they had confetti. Yeah. I was really surprised with that at the end. But I think probably, did they play the confetti? They did it during the encore song, didn't they?
Yeah.
I thought that was my favorite visual moment because I just thought it was so clever to, one, have an encore song like a concert would, and then also to have the confetti and like everything turns kind of gold. And so I just thought visually that was really nice. In general, I think visually all of the way that the lighting and things change were all really good. Mm-hmm. But I think that would probably be my favorite.
My favorite was in the very beginning of the show when the 6 wives, they all take their marks and they have the individual spotlights and their backs are to the audience, and they say divorced, beheaded, died. And for me, I just thought that the like pose and the silhouette was like, it was a very like strong stage presence moment. And I just really, really liked that. And I thought it made like a really lasting impression in regards to like, okay, like they're here and this is going to be fun and I'm going to get to hear about this. So I thought that moment visually was just it was like the beginning of the storytelling, and I just thought it was nice. Okay, last question. If you could change something, what change would you make? Character, plot component, change one thing.
I think I would make the show longer and do kind of like what you mentioned earlier, which is to have them, you know, they can have all their individual songs about like, here's who we were married to, you know, Henry VIII, but then, well, here's what else we have to offer. And like, I completely agree with what you said. Like, I don't care. Make it up. Just fabricate some backstory for these people so that we can kind of enjoy them and get to know them and have them. Maybe the point of the story isn't, hey, we're in competition with each other. The point of the story at the end, like the moral isn't, we should all be friends. The moral is we are who we are because it's who we are, not because of who we were married to. Mm-hmm. So I think I would probably change that.
Yeah, I think same. I mean, I hate to just be like same, but I think that.
But you were just like same.
Yeah. I think that's really the biggest downfall of the storytelling is that right when the attachment starts to grow, it's over. And I think that if you really want your audience to be truly emotionally invested in these women, you have to give us more time with them. And it was just a little too fast and a little too detached because after a song is over, you have to detach and move on to the next. And so this quick detachment is just not the most natural way, I think, to garner affection for your characters. So that's what I would say. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think we got it.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode. Hope you had a good time. If you did not, feel free to tell us why so that we can improve. Links to show notes, Patreon, socials, suggestion box, all on our website. That is lionandmousepodcast.com. Review this episode. Let us know what you think. Thank you so much for listening. We will, as always, catch you in the next one.